the Oklahoma Newsroom, it's time for the Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. Guys, OU spring ball rolls right along, and some interesting stuff to talk about coming out as players and coaches address the media. Tell us a little bit about what's happening behind very closed doors at Oklahoma. But obviously, Ryan, the biggest topic is Jalen Hurts, the situation at quarterback. You know, it seems like if Kyler Murray went to the fall before he won that job, we're unlikely to hear anything anytime soon, right? I mean, isn't that sort of the thought at this point with the quarterbacks?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way he's going to announce Jalen Hurts as a starter before, you know, I would say at least a month before the season. Likely it'll be even a shorter time. Lincoln Riley likes to draw out these quarterback battles in order to keep everybody invested and fighting, but it would really be stunning if anybody other than Jalen Hurts was the quarterback. Lincoln Riley talked a little bit about how Hurts is fitting in the spring. He said it's a little bit of a give and take process, that there's some, you know, one, he's not taking it lightly on Jalen Hurts just because he's only been in the system for a few months, but it's also a feeling out process of what Jalen's more comfortable with, you know, what are some of the things that he's not entirely comfortable with in the system. And he said that's something that happens with every quarterback, but just with this situation, it's a little bit more compressed. You
know, even though Lincoln Riley is feeling out Jalen Hurts, Barry, it sure sounded like to me the access that we had to Jalen Hurts is that he's taking ownership of this starting position. You know, regardless of what Lincoln Riley says, it really sounds like he's saying, I'm the guy, and I'm the guy moving forward. I'm going to take the leadership role in this whole thing.
I agree completely. I mean, I think Jalen Hurts announced who is the starting quarterback at Oklahoma, because he's been here 15 minutes and he comes in and he starts talking about, hey, here's what we need to do. Here's the culture we need to establish. Here's why you know, it's been a great program, but it needs to take the next step. And you know, I don't have all the answers, but here's what I think, and here's what I think we all need to do. That doesn't sound like a backup quarterback to me. So. Just common sense tells us all that Jalen Hurts is going to be the quarterback in 2019. But you're right, Jacko. The way he's projecting himself, the way he's presenting himself, there's not really a question.
And I guess, Ryan, if you're a guy that's won 26 starts, has, you know, been in the games that Jalen Hurts has been in, I guess that's a lot of what he would bring to the table. To hear something different might be a little bit odd.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we expected out of him. I mean, the reason that he transferred from Alabama was to be a starting quarterback somewhere where he could be on a similar level than he was with the Crimson Tide, and clearly that's what he found at Oklahoma. Clearly that's what the behind-the-scenes conversations with Lincoln Riley were about before he arrived. I understand that we've got to go through this, but Jalen Hurts is a starter. You know, that Lincoln Riley doesn't have to say it, but I think we have to.
Yeah, right, exactly. The question now becomes, what does Oklahoma need to see on the field? I mean, it sounds like behind the scenes, in the locker room, in the huddle, Jalen Hurts taking control of this. But we know that he, at least the numbers would say, he's not the type of quarterback that they've had in this system the last 2 years. They've had transcendent quarterbacks, but Barry, Lincoln Riley's system is about throwing it down the field. What do they need to see? What does Jalen Hurts need to be doing on the field to really, you know, keep that offense moving forward?
Well, he's shown, I think, that he's a good quarterback, a very good quarterback, maybe a great quarterback. I don't know. But if he can just deliver the ball on target, if it's not 40 yards downfield, you can deal with that. But you can't deal with a quarterback who's inaccurate on any of the intermediate passes. Jalen Hurts has shown that he can be accurate. If he can just deliver the ball where it needs to be, even in a condensed field, the offense is going to be fine. The extra threat of a run, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, a good scrambler. Kyler Murray, a fantastic runner. But Jalen Hurts gives you the added element of really being able to run like a tailback in a lot of ways. Lincoln Riley will be able to use that. The offense won't look exactly the same as it has in the past. It will look some different, but it still should be very effective as long as Jalen Hurts can be accurate with his throws.
You know, Ryan, one of the things I was interested to hear Jalen say that I hadn't thought much about was how many offensive coordinators and quarterback coaches he's played for. I mean, this guy, it's been a revolving door at Alabama. Now, the revolving door's worked pretty well. They've won a lot of games despite the revolving door. But this is a guy who has moved from one coach to another to another. Now he's with a guy in Lincoln Riley that you know, he's become something of a quarterback whisperer. You know, is this a chance to unlock something more in Jalen Hurts, or is it about sort of refining what he's already done to this point?
Well, I think it's a little bit of both. Clearly, what Lincoln Riley does is different from anything that Jalen Hurts has experienced. But also, I think last year with the direction Alabama's offense took, and we didn't see as much of it on the field just because Jalen Hurts wasn't the starter, but I think we saw a little bit of it in the SEC championship game when he got in there in the second half against Georgia and performed so well that you know, maybe he's a little bit better passer than I think a lot of people gave him credit for to that point. Now, he's got to take some steps forward. Like Barry says, though, accuracy is going to be the key, especially when you've got all the offensive weapons that they have, when you're throwing to CeeDee Lamb, you know, 3 5-star freshman receivers that are coming in, Jaden Hazelwood, Trajan Bridges, Theo Weiss, Lee Morris has been productive for them. So they've got plenty of offensive weapons. It's just getting the ball to them in an accurate fashion. That's the biggest key. You know,
we've talked about the quarterback battle. We'll continue to talk about the quarterback battle, but there are some other positions on the offensive side of the ball. Offensive line, clearly, but that H-back position, a position that has, you know, produced some really good players. Carson Meyer, obviously, in that spot a year ago. He's gone. Now they're looking for the replacement. Ryan, you stumbled into a very interesting story about a guy that is potentially going to take over that role, Braden Willis. And, you know, we say that no recruit is unknown, but maybe Braden Willis was.
Yeah, he was a guy who had you know, a couple D1 bites, but nothing really serious. Decided not to sign in last December or the December before last to wait until the February signing period, hoping that things would open up. But things didn't really open up for him until Lincoln Riley and Cale Gundy took a recruiting visit to Colleyville Heritage, not even his own high school. And as they're walking out the door, one of the Colleyville assistants said, "Hey, there's this guy I think you probably should look at who's not getting a lot of looks. His name's Braden Willis from Arlington, James Martin. You know, check out his film and see what you think." Lincoln Riley, Cale Gundy pile into Gundy's truck, and Riley pulls up the highlight video, and at stoplights he's leaning over to the driver's side and say, "Hey, look at this kid. I think this is what we need as our last piece of this class." Well, they drive over to James Martin High School, offer the kid, and a week later he's signed with the Sooners, and now a year later he's competing for the starting H-back role after moving from tight end.
It doesn't happen a lot that guys that are potentially D1 starters, you know, are largely unknown until the very last minute. But that H-back role, Barry, it has been, you know, quietly, because it's not, you know, it's not the running back position, quarterback, wide receiver, but that's been a pretty darn important position for the Sooners over the last decade plus.
Well, yeah, and they've had good players there. You know, Dimitri Flowers and Trey Millard, and going back into the first half of the first part of this century, you know, Bob Stoops' favorite players, J.D. Runnels and that crowd. So, and you know what, it's been a progression too, because those first few years just sort of hard-nosed, tough.
Yeah, Seth Luttrell, J.D.
Yeah,
Runnels.
the dude that ended up playing for the Packers from Kansas. I forgot his name.
Anyway, Ripkowski?
Aaron Ripkowski, perfect example. Just a bunch of hard-nosed football players. But then you get into Trey Millard and Dimitri Flowers, and you're talking about guys that can do a lot of things. Trey Millard jumps over Longhorns. Dimitri Flowers moves to tailback in Ames and rushes for 120 yards. So it's been an evolution at that position, finding the hard-nosed guys, but also very skilled that can do a lot of things. So a guy like Willis, you know, might just fit the bill.
Who does Braden Willis? What mold does he fall into from what we know, Ryan? Is he going to be more of that fullback position, or is he more the tight end coming out of the backfield?
Well, I mean, he moved from tight end, so he more fits into that. So he's going to have the ability to catch the ball out of the backfield. The biggest thing for him is going to be some of those blocks and other things that you've got to do, more of the fullback role. But Lincoln Riley's shown that he's still making this position a focal point of their offense. Didn't have it as much last year with Carson Meyer, although at the end of the year he was really good as well. But I think with either of these guys, Braden Willis or Jeremiah Hall, they'll be able to lean on them maybe a little bit more than they did the first half of last year.
Guys, as spring rolls on, we've had a chance to talk to some players and some coaches, and I would venture to say that probably the most interesting things that we've heard came out of, you know, Jalen Hurts' mouth. That 3-minute opening statement that I think kind of surprised us all was a wow moment. But maybe the words that have sort of resonated the most in this spring come from Alex Grinch. He said, alarmingly thin, Barry, when talking about his secondary. That's pretty frank talk right there. What do you make of the defensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, saying such, you know, those words really can't be, you can't couch them when you say your secondary is alarmingly thin.
Yeah, it alarmed me because I thought of the secondary as maybe the strength of the defense, for crying out loud. So they've seemed alarmingly thin at linebacker in the line here in the last 12, 18 months. So I think it was just sort of a shot across the bow for Alex Grinch to remind people, hey, this is a work in progress. This is not a turnkey operation. I did not inherit the fearsome foursome and the steel curtain. We're going to have some problems. Now, everybody likes everything they've heard from Alex Grinch. He seems to be bringing in a system, an aggressive system that everybody's going to like, a new attitude, all the kinds of things, the reasons you make a change. But, you know, the biggest problem, which was overall defensive talent, has not changed. That's going to take more time.
Well, and Ryan, I mean, to his point, it sounds like that Oklahoma, as it looks for more guys for the secondary, they've seen some decommitments in the secondary, signaling the kind of players they're looking for, and the guys they have right now might or might not sort of fit that prototype.
Yeah, there's certainly a big chunk of them that don't necessarily fit what Alex Grinch really wants to do defensively. Now, they've got some size at some spots, they've got some speed at the spots, but right now, size and speed are non-negotiable for Alex Grinch on the recruiting trail, and I think that's why you've seen a couple of those guys decommit. Right now, they don't have any 2020 commitments in the secondary, and they feel really good about what they're doing moving forward, but it's been a sea change for them. I know it's easy to say all football coaches recruit size and speed, but at times you bargain for one role or the other, and now that's just not negotiable for Grinch.
And Ryan, I'm curious too, because, you know, yeah, everybody wants big defensive backs and safeties that can run really fast. Yeah, right, everybody does, including Bill Belichick and, you know, anybody in the NFL. Is that going to put that secondary recruiting into a very small pond? If you're, I mean, maybe that's the standard Oklahoma needs to aspire for.
Yeah, I think that's the thought, is that Oklahoma doesn't need to limit itself. Now, clearly there's spots that are going to be hard to recruit to. The defensive line has been really hard to recruit to in the Big 12. But Alex Grinch feels like, and the rest of that defensive staff feels like, they don't need to compromise in the secondary, that they can convince those really fast guys with size at that spot that they can thrive in the Big 12 and against these offenses. So that'll be something that's going to be really interesting to watch, not only in the 2020 class, but 2021 and beyond, how Alex Grinch is able to manage that.
You know, Barry, I know it's sort of alarmingly alarmed as we talk about all of this with the secondary and the defense, but I'm reminded, too, that Alex Grinch, especially at Washington State, I mean, they didn't have nearly the athletes that Oklahoma has, and yet they made strides forward. They were able to do some damage in the Pac-12, maybe not as pass-happy or as talent-rich as the Big 12 right now. But is that sort of, even though Alex Grinch is saying these things and we're seeing these decommitments, is the silver lining that he's been able to move defenses forward even with guys that maybe aren't his prototypes before? I
think that's true. Alex Grinch was not hired because of his Ohio State pedigree. He was hired because of what he did at Washington State back in 14, 15, 16, back in those years. So, yeah, it's great that he spent some time in Columbus, Ohio, and has an Ohio State on his resume. But that wasn't overly impressive, what the Buckeyes did. What he did in Pullman was impressive, because that's an outpost. That's a place where it's hard to get players, hard to win, and he produced good defense for Mike Leach, and that's why Lincoln Riley called him up.
And in a system that's really hard for defenses to thrive, which sometimes Lincoln Riley's system has been perceived as that as well, obviously coming from the Mike Leach tree.
Yeah. So yes, the answer is yes. He's accustomed to this. So when he says we're alarmingly thin at defensive back, that's still no excuse for not being better on defense. The Sooners ended up with the worst defense in the Big 12 last season, and that's just nuts. And it needs to get a lot better. Championship level, probably not, but it needs to get better even here in year one with Alex Grinch.
All right, guys, as we sit here, we're a little over a week from the spring game. Ryan, do we have a sense at this point what this is going to look like. I mean, big crowd last year on a really cold day. They had a concert. They're doing that again. Are we expecting sort of something similar? Maybe warmer temperatures. I wouldn't mind that myself. But is there sort of a, in your mind's eye, what this spring game is going to look like for the Sooners?
Well, Lincoln Riley keeps pumping it up as it needs to be even bigger than last year. Obviously, they had some weather issues last year that maybe kept that crowd down. I don't think we're going to see the entire place filled up. We can't see the entire place filled up because there's some work being done in the north end zone, which is why that concert is going to be on the field instead of in that north end zone where Trace Atkins performed last year. But this is a really big recruiting weekend for Oklahoma. They've got quite a few big-time recruits coming in, so they want to make a big impression, and I think that's what Lincoln Riley's going to try to do.
Barry, every year we see guys that are spring game heroes and then fade from our view. So I don't put too much stock in the spring game, but maybe with, everybody's going to be watching quarterbacks, obviously, but are there players that you're looking, we'll talk a lot more about the spring game next week, but just from an early glance, players that you're curious to see how they perform in the spring game?
Well, I want to see these young wide receivers that Bobby Hebert talked about. There's openings there, and there's talent, billed as talent on campus. So I'd like to see who's going to fill the shoes of those guys who caught so many passes over the years. So, when I watch a spring game, I'm hard-pressed to really figure out what's going on. I'm hard-pressed to know who's playing well on defense or if it means anything. But the pitch and catch game is something you can actually sort of figure out. So the quarterbacks and the receivers, that to me is something that we can learn a lot about at the red-white game.
All right, well, we'll talk a lot more about the OU spring game next week because we'll be on the doorstep. It's Saturday, April 13th. It's a 3 o'clock kick start. I don't know what they're going to do, if they're actually going to kick off or just throw the ball in the air and go from there. We'll see, but it's coming up 2 Saturdays from now, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.